Hey, with the new music, I'm George Stroumboulopoulos. All right, we're going to take a look at the history of electronic music. So electricity not only changed the way music was recorded and amplified, but it actually became the music itself. So from its humble beginnings, from the theremin to the big beats of the dance floor, electronic music has become the wave of pop culture.
The two major things who changed music in the 20th century are probably Africa and technology. Africa because it gave us, in our Western music, the groove and the beat. And technology because it changed entirely our relationship with music.
Tom, would you say that the theremin is the start of electronic music?
It's one of the first instruments for sure. It was a huge hit in the 20s when they were invented, and then they kind of disappeared into obscurity for a long time and were sort of resurrected by a lot of film composers. It sort of started to reappear in sort of electronica recently.
There's a lot of feel you can get out of that instrument. It's very difficult to play. They're still used in orchestras.
What's the most famous example of the theremin in pop culture?
That would be the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations.
I'm picking up good vibrations. She give me the excitation.
I began hitting things around me, and wherever I was, and I'd go into junkyards and collect bits of metal and so on, and I organized a percussion orchestra.
The tape recorder was invented by the Germans during the Second World War. Composers who had been, there were precedents, but composers who were suddenly realized that they could get a machine and they could use real found sounds in their compositions. It exploded. In the 50s, there was an explosion of music.
All the work from Pierre-Henry and Pierre Schaeffer in France and Stockhausen in Cologne. I studied music with Pierre Schaeffer in the Music Research Center, and all these recordings made at that time where these guys really created and invented the concept of sampling 40 years before.
This is probably the world's first synthesizer. There were electronic organs developed before the Second World War, like the Hammond. Unlike the Hammond, though, Hugh Lecane's Sackbut was far more flexible and sensitive, could make a far greater range of sounds, and allowed far more sensitive control at the keyboard. This would be the first synthesizer, although the word itself was not invented till 1959, so a good 15 years almost after he developed the Sackbut, the synthesizer word was coined.
Everything started by switch-on bar, because a lot of people said, oh, this is an incredible machine able to replace an orchestra, and that was not the point. For me, what Walter Carlos did for Clockwork Orange is much more important for the future of electronic music than switch-on bar, in my opinion. Because he used technology to create a kind of sound that had never been existed before.
The beast you see behind me is the thing that started it all. Built for me by Robert Moog in 1968, I guess. Eventually, when we went to the States, Bob came along to the first one of the performances that we did, and he was completely staggered. I mean, he couldn't, first of all, he couldn't believe how somebody could develop that amount of confidence in this piece of equipment, how somebody could be mad enough to take it on the road in the first place, you know. So I think he saw the possibilities of making production models and things.
The key innovation that Robert Moog brought to the whole technology, and Hugh LeCaine too, a couple of people were involved, was a way of controlling the oscillators so that you could actually play it like a keyboard. And so all of a sudden it looked like a familiar instrument again, and people could start to play familiar melodies.
I was invited to a Roxy rehearsal to do something purely technical. There was a synthesizer there. I started playing that, and bit by bit I started contributing more to the sound of the band. That was really what interested me.
We invent new instruments hundreds of times a day. That's actually most of what pop music is about, in my opinion. It's about the invention of new sounds.
Signal will come in here, record on this tape, pass along the left machine to the right machine. The right machine functions as a playback. The signal is played back from this machine into the left machine, where the signal is recorded a second time, passes along the tape into this machine, is sent back a third time, is recorded a third time, sent back, and so on, and one builds up this system of multiple delay, multiple layering. There's nothing really sophisticated about it at all. These are techniques which were being used in principle in the 1940s. This system was introduced to me by Brian Eno in July 1972. Terry Riley was using it in the 60s. It was in tape manuals for electronic composition in the late 50s. The technological improvement that I need next is not in the hardware, it's in me.
The 80s were a big problem for us with regards to the media. It was a big struggle, and we had to defend electronic music constantly.
Hey, welcome back. You're watching the New Music's look at the history of electronic music. All right, by the early 70s, what you had was electronic music becoming more and more popular in pop music. So you take new technologies and you marry it to a keen sense of exploration, especially by the German bands, and what you get is a whole new wave of interest in the synthesizer.
Where to next? What's the next huge leap in electronic music?
Vocoder is one of them. The vocoder, which is sort of buried underneath here. The business end is just a microphone here, but you can talk into it, and it turns you into a robot.
Kraftwerk used this a fair bit, did they not?
Absolutely.
Kraftwerk, actually, they started very early in the 60s already to producing electronic music.
We discovered German bands, and that really got us interested in playing music, i.e. sort of Kraftwerk.
The 80s were a big problem for us with regards to the media. It was a big struggle. But the fans were there in droves. We had to defend electronic music constantly.
Here in my car, I go sing best of all. I can lock on my doors. It's the only way to live in cars.
You say that in the future you really think machines and men are going to get a lot closer.
Yeah, I don't know if we stay close for very long, but I think we'll have to for a while. I think machines will outlast man. I don't think they will take over man. I think man will probably wipe himself out and the machines will just keep running everything the way they do now.
Do you find that using a lot of synthesizers in your music, it's hard to stay human? A lot of bands seem to have that problem.
Not at all. That's because it's really easy to hide behind the synthesizer. If you don't have any stage presence or personality at all, it's the easiest thing in the world to look cold and really far removed and stand behind a synthesizer and call it art, you know?
Somehow it seems the same.
I think the new wave, gave the, opened the door for electronic music into the pop world. And but at the same time, it was on the other side, on the hardware side. It was exactly the time where the Japanese started to be involved seriously into marketing electronic instruments.
Belgium was like, in the 80s, they had like this front 242, split second, this industrial techno scene over there in Germany, also in Holland, also in Canada. I was a big fan of Skinny Puppy.
A distorted sample or a noise on a keyboard is the equivalent of a loud, distorted AC/DC guitar in the electronic world, you know. It's a way of conveying power and anger and aggression.
After the German new wave in the 80s, then when dance music was becoming more and more popular. So I think it was a question of time that the DJs took over the whole thing.
That sound electrified the whole world, and the synthesizer sound, it just grabbed all different communities, and it became an international phenomenon.
The whole history of Detroit techno started, I suppose you could say, from Kevin Saunderson, Juan Atkinson, Derek May.
I think we were like way ahead of our time, like 10, 15 years.
A culture really that was generated out of a black crowd and black scene here then got co-opted by like white Brits. Why do you think that happened?
The British press. I blame it all on the British press.
As fascinating as it might seem, we don't have any idea how that happened. We don't know. Of course, we had this association and this real attachment to black soul music, but we had more infatuation with what was going on over there. So when it jumped, it seemed almost like maybe we wished it, or maybe somehow we subconsciously made music more for them than for us.
Overall, it was a good thing. You know, I don't feel ripped off. I think it was just the process of evolution, more or less.
It takes suddenly like safe white guys from England to be doing it for everyone to start falling over themselves saying, oh, it's all this new electronic music.
All right, from the disdain of the critics in the early 80s to the joys of the new heroes of the dance floor, electronic music received its biggest push from nightclubs and the rave scene. So we begin this final chapter with house music. It's hybrid disco that got its start in Chicago.
House music originally started from, I would say, the old Philadelphia sound. DJs and clubs in Chicago would play it, and therefore it became popular. And some of these records were hard to get, so DJs started making their own versions.
I might lay a, a drum break from another song, loop it underneath it, and have, a completely different song playing on top of it, just to create a new song.
That's the way love is. That's the way love is.
There's a couple of key machines that were put out in the early 80s that completely changed the sound of house music. Two drum machines that were put out by Roland, the 909 and the 808.
Hence the band names?
Hence the band names. The sounds have become, they're not even really like electronic instruments anymore. They've become so much part of the musical vocabulary that they're just thought of as sort of generic drum sounds.
Up until around 89, there really wasn't a distinction between house and techno. They were the same beats per minute, same general approach. It was instrumental music for the most part made with electronic instruments. But then as the 90s developed, house went this way, techno went, house stayed at the 124 beat per minute, became more soulful, and techno kept getting faster and more electronic sounding.
English rave scene culture, which started in about 86, 87. We took the elements of American music and mixed it in with our UK pop music and turned it into our own inimitable sound, like the sound of Bill Eric and the sound of acid house. And then, in a sense, trance was a very loosely used term based on a record which is repetitive and it's within its sound, which took you into a trance-like state.
So what did you think when you first went into that rave scene?
I thought it was amazing. I just thought it was incredible. It was non-violent. There was no, booze, so people weren't getting off their faces and fighting. It was very, very happy. It was very, very positive. That people they'd pay like 20 quid to go to something that was. The facilities were incredible. Amazing sound systems, incredible light shows, fairground rides, and all kinds of sort of sideshow attraction type things. And the thing would go on for 24 hours, or sometimes the whole weekend.
Just the radio now has got to play this music because people want to hear it, People go out to a club and they hear this record, and it's an amazing record. And they also want to be able to hear it when they're driving along in their car. So I think it's more like radio reacting to, a groundswell of desire to hear this music.
I'm a fire starter, twisted fire starter.
Here's the problem with this newfound major label media interest in electronic music. Every single hip-hop record that's been made from 1980 until now is electronic. And every single house record is electronic, and every single freestyle record, and every single reggae record, for the most part, it's all completely electronic. The same instruments that the Prodigy use and the Chemical Brothers use, but, so I mean, literally millions of records have been made that are all electronic in the last 20 years. But they're made by black people, and by fags, and by Hispanics, and the white media didn't want to know about it. And made them very uncomfortable. They're like, ooh, that's other people's music, and it takes suddenly like safe white guys from England to be doing it for everyone to start falling over themselves saying, oh, it's all this new electronic music. No, it's been going on for 20 years.
I always say like spirituality through technology. And I think if you just have a look at the Love Parade, what is going on over there. We're expecting 1.5 million people again this year dancing on electronic music, but all the people want to come together. They want to shake hands. They want to touch each other. It's like it's a little affair with the machines and the humans.
In Europe, the whole techno house culture in the widest sense has been portrayed and looked at as the big youth culture.
When the wall came down in '89, there was a big explosion techno-wise over here. The whole East was like celebrating the freedom and everything happened in Berlin. So what we have as a result out of this is that we have for any kind out of electronic music. I mean, like acid, drum and bass, electro, minimal, hardcore. We have like several clubs.
Who could have said, for instance, that a turntable would become one of the major instruments of the 90s? I mean, this constant fun with technology, constant idea of parroting, hijacking things you have around, like a child. What makes electronic music, and in a different way than this kind of coded system we've been through for centuries.
How does it feel to have all this happening in Detroit finally?
It's a homecoming, actually. It's good. It's long awaited.
When you guys were doing this kind of music decades ago, did you have any idea it would blow up to be something like this?
No, not like this. I mean, we were doing it for the love of the music, for what we thought was right, because we were DJs and we wanted to play our music. So, no, it caught us all off guard. It caught us all off guard when London and the rest of the world grabbed it. But, you know, I think we realized that we were talented and we love what we do.
This is the most important thing I think has happened for electronic music since, you know, Juan Atkins did his first track.
At the end of the day, all of this stuff and all of this cheap technology is just liberating. It's changed the art form entirely, and there's no sort of turning back. Everyone's pretty much used to the sort of electronic sound at this point, but there's no going back, and you can't sort of remain a Luddite at this point. They're here to kind of stay.
I think electronic music opened the doors of we are ready as a musician to play and to do music with basically anything. And the difference between noise and music is your intention, what you want to do with the noise.
All right, there you have it, the history of electronica. That's it for this edition of the New Music. We would love your input on the subject. It's NewMusic at MuchMusic.com. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.